Take what you need. That is something, if you ask me, we should heed more often in life. And when crafting, sometimes it's the time you should take to implement a sudden idea. So let's make a giant card today with a tear-off sheet like on an advertising pillar. Hi, this is Luise Heinzel, and my card today is going to become approximately the size of an ideology backdrop in the end. You've heard right. I say approximately because I will put a layer behind my backdrop, which is slightly bigger than a backdrop. But what I'm trying to say here is if you want to imitate this card, then you might consider a backdrop as well, because that is a very easy starting point. I want to use this set Hodgepodge from the new release by Stampers Anonymous and Tim Holtz first to jazz up this backdrop a little bit and to give the feeling of this advertising pillar. I want to have a really randomly stamped thing on this already, like it's looking like paper, this backdrop, and there's already some writing on it so that it looks really used already, but I want to have more interest and more of this feeling that there have been advertisements which have been torn off over the time, and for that and for many other things, this stamp is just perfect. I think this is going to become one of my most favorite stamps ever because you can use it for so many different things. It's a really good stamp for filling in some blank spaces, not only on cards, but also in journals, for example. If you need something here and there where you think, oh, it's too empty, this stamp is just perfect. So next I want to use some Distress Oxide ink pumice stone on some watercolor paper. This is the watercolor cardstock by Ranger, but of course you can take what you have. And I want to create something that looks like a nearly white sheet of paper with this saying, take what you need on it, and the things that you can tear off if you walk along the street and you see this paper. And I was struggling a little bit because I thought, normally, what would you do if you would make such a paper and hang it to an advertising pillar or somewhere else? You would take probably a copy paper and then go to your computer, write what you want to write, and then print it out. And then you would have a white piece of paper with probably some black writing, So I thought, what could have happened to this paper during the time? And of course, if it rains or if some other dirt comes to this paper, it would get a little dirty and not white anymore. And that's what I'm trying to reach here with the pumice stone oxide ink. I have put several layers of the oxide ink on this paper. So as you can see, I have dried that in between to get these really nice and nearly like water drops, like wet paper look. That was not a sentence, but I think you got me. Perhaps you are new to oxide ink or distress ink, then you need to know that you have to dry the different layers in between before you go on with your layering. If you do that wet in wet, then you would blend the different layers and you won't get these nice little dots and this pattern of the ink. So perhaps you want to have that in mind if you want to make such a card. So now you can see how I very professionally measure where my words shall go. I wanted to have a really handmade look of this. Of course, you could take a ruler and then measure everything really exactly. But I haven't done that for two different reasons. And the first reason is that I wanted the people to see that this was stamped by hand. And the second reason is, and I tried it out with a stamping platform, if you take a stamping platform, then you could, of course, measure the distance of the letters and the distance from the letters to the edges of the paper really exactly. But if you put these letters to the stamping platform, then for my taste, the letters have been too far away from each other. There was a too big space between each of the letters because of the rubber of the stamp. Even if I put them really close to each other, I mean, the stamping looks nice and the words look nice, but for the proportion of my card, it was not what I wanted. And that is the second reason why I stamped it like, by hand and without making marks or so. You can see it's a little bit wonky, but I think that adds to the interest of this card as well. So then, next I have taken the quotes from the floristry set. As you can see, there is, for example, love you and hello friend, miss you, happy birthday, and that are all things which are not matching what I want to do here when I stamp them in total. So I looked for words on those little quotes that could fit here. So even if I can't write or stamp love you, because that would make no sense in combination with this card and the purpose of the card, but I can use the word love, because you could need love and then you could tear this little paper off, and I can take the word you, so that I can tear it off, or the person who walks along this paper. I can take friend and just leave the hello from hello friend out. And so I searched for the words that could fit here, and again, measured very, very professionally how big these little sections have to be. So I have taken 3/4 of an inch here, but of course that depends on the size of the words you want to stamp. If you have exactly this stamp set, and if you do it like I do it here, and you look to the measurements here on my mat, of course then you can do it in exactly the same way. But if you have bigger stamps, please just place them to the edge of the card, and then you can see how big this whole thing can be. And then I have taken my scissors to cut into the paper here. And I've done that on purpose with my scissors instead of using my paper trimmer, to give it a more authentic look. Because imagine if someone would hang something like this to an advertising pillar, for example, then the person would probably use scissors as well. And I also have closed the scissors on the very end, or to the very end. Do you know what I mean? Then there comes this little damage that we normally don't like when we cut with scissors, but here I did that on purpose to have these tiny details that make this whole thing more authentic. I've also torn 2 of the strips off here because, someone has already taken what he or she needed. And the other thing is, to be honest, I haven't had enough words I could stamp to the papers here. So the quotes from the stamp set had 1, 2, 3, I just have to count, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 words that were matching this theme. So that was really good that I could tear the other papers off so that I had enough. So then I have stamped, as I said, only the portions of the stamps that made sense. And here I did something where I later on regretted that a little bit, because I thought if the smaller words were on the very bottom of each of the strips and the longer words, then, they would be longer, then that could look a little weird, and the smaller words, the shorter words, could look a little lost. So that was the reason why I stamped the words several times after each other, and I separate them here with a little dot from this stamp here. This is from, I guess, from the last Halloween release, if I remember that right, from Stampers Anonymous and Tim Holtz. And I thought these little dots give it not only more interest, but they also separate the words. And then I thought, wait, if several people come along this paper, then they could tear, for example, the word friend twice. So the first person can tear friend, and then one friend is left. Do you know what I mean? The same with love and you and the other words. And I thought that looks a little more, like a bottom of this card. Because what is this? There's this really fat stamping, there's really fat font on the top, and these small words on the bottom, and I wanted to have the proportion more harmonious. I also used this stamp for making a little dot at the end of the sentence. I used a portion of the stamp so that there are several more dots, because I thought that looks nice in combination with the inked background. And then, how it is when you have a stamp in your hands, I thought, let's go a little crazy and let's make some more dirt, in this case, more interest to the background. So I stamped here and there with this stamp, but I used the second generation of the stamping so that it doesn't get too dark. Then I have taken here from the French garden set this little writing stamp. This is like handwriting, because I thought those dots are a little lost and a little bit too much contrast to this light background. And I also thought, I can't take this white paper and put that to my card. Do you know what I mean? I liked this idea so much and I had so much fun while I did that, that I thought, I have my stamps here, I have ink, so let's have some fun and let's stamp some more things to the background and also to the little papers that you can tear off on the bottom. I think it's sometimes hard in a positive way, because then you talk to yourself and you consider different things. It's sometimes hard to get a realistic thing, something that could be in the reality exactly like it is here. And on the other hand, make that artsy and make that interesting, because what is that in reality? It's a white sheet of paper with some black printing on it. Yeah, it has a meaning, of course, but the visual thing is not so interesting, is it? So let's ink the edges of this paper a little bit, because I thought the whole thing is a little bit cold because of this white paper, and pumice stone is a relatively warm brownish gray. It's warm, yes, but the whole thing was too cold in my eyes and still too much contrast from the black to the white. So I inked all of the edges, also the edges of these little papers there on the bottom. I have used a little additional paper to make my life a little easier and to not smear the ink to the paper. So then I've taken some double-sided tape to place the sheet here on my backdrop, and there you can also see the frame I have left from the backdrop. It's relatively big compared to other cards, but of course I want to see some of this stamping from the hodgepodge set stamp. It's not a set, it's just a stamp. One stamp, but it's really versatile. It's like you have thousands of stamps. So but what I'm trying to say is I wanted to have this background, of course, shown and like a big part of this whole thing, so that you can see what it shall be. I have backed the whole thing with a black sheet of watercolor paper and then cut it into the right size. I went to my sewing machine and I have sewn around this whole thing with a brown thread so that it matches the oxide ink scotched timber I have used before. And then I came to the idea that I want to tear some of these papers off, because that not only looks more harmonious for the card, but it is in my eyes, I learned that that it is not so good to say in my eyes. From my point of view, thanks to the person who has taught me that, from my point of view, it's better when it's more irregular for the harmony of the card, and also for making it more realistic. Because what would happen if a person comes along this thing, then probably, or not probably, perhaps the word love, for example, is torn off once, and for example the word you is torn off twice or so, yeah, so that it is like more used. The same reason I did no that can't become a sentence, Louise. For the same reason I crumpled the little sheets here a little bit, these little papers, because I thought if there's really like windy weather or something, or the paper is on the advertising how is the word, pillar? Is that the word? For a very long time, then there would probably come some dirt or some rain or something like that to this paper, or if only people would touch it, then it would get perhaps a little bit dirty. I've also distressed the edges of the upper part of the paper a little bit by using my fingernail tool. And then here's the card. Really, really easy. It's also a relatively fast project. And I think this is, yeah, a little thing with a big meaning. But hopefully you see it the same. It is something like this for me. So perhaps you want to let me know what you think about this. And if you have any questions, then please let me know. Have a very great and creative day. Bye bye.